most of the time we can talk about child abuse as, uh, well, physical child abuse. We see that. Sexual child abuse, there's plenty of examples of that as well. Both are extremely horrific, but what about emotional abuse? What about emotional neglect? When you're denying a child access to both parents. Look, if mom and dad want to get divorced, but the kids need to be allowed to love both parents equally.
Rod McCall is an author, speaker, and educator who uses his personal experience with parental alienation to help others. His situation was so severe it led to the death of his son Eryk, killed by the hands of his own mother when she lost her parental rights as the courts finally saw through her alienating behavior. Rod wrote his first book, For the Love of Eryk, to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. Part one of the book is Rod's captivating and important story, showing how parental alienation can happen. Part two of the book tells the stories of many others, specifically addressing what parental alienation is and how it can be stopped. Through interviewing many other parents, as well as professionals in family law, Rod's book is a powerful resource which can raise awareness, educate, and be a catalyst for change. Rod, thank you for coming on to Triumph Talks. I have really looked forward to seeing you again because I got to work with you quite a bit on your book and to talk to you about your book and all that you have accomplished with it.
Well, absolutely. I am actually very honored to be part of your presentation today. So thank you very much. And it's good to see you too. It's been a while.
Yeah, we go back a little bit. Well, let me start with the first question, and feel free to share your story as you do. And the first question is, what inspired you to write this book?
Oh, wow. Um, well, I think it started more as a self-healing process, being able to tell my story, to explain what I went through, writing it down. I journaled a lot during going through the divorce. It was a way to help me kind of process all that was going on, the stress, the anxiety, the depression, the aggravation. Just divorce in itself is a very, very tough situation to go through. After Eryk had died, I felt like there's got to be a reason, and I struggled with finding that reason, and so I just started compiling all the different stuff, and I had a variety of people suggest, "Hey, you ought to write a book. You ought to write a book."
Hmm.
Well, okay, that's easy to say, but how the heck do you write a book? And so after a while, oh, I'd say a couple of years anyway, um, I guess actually closer to 3 years, I decided, you know what? Let's try it. Let's see what happens. I'm a big bibliophile. I love to read. It's one of my favorite hobbies. And so I started just kind of putting things together, organizing um, my thoughts. And then after you and I were introduced to, to this project, I really became inspired to the prospects of what I might be able to do for other people. As I learned about a topic I had no idea of titled parental alienation.
Hmm.
And as I explored and researched and discussed and talked to more folks, the more I came to understand what a real challenge and problem it is. And when you talk to somebody, unless they'd been through it, they were unaware of what parental alienation was. I've even talked to some judges over the years, and they go, "Oh, it's just a divorce dodge. I've heard of that." And it's kind of like, no, no, it's not a divorce dodge. And so, in the process of not writing my book, I quickly came to the realization that just telling my sad story, what happened to Eryk and I and our family,
Hmm.
was not going to be enough. Not for me. I'm a professional educator. I've been involved in education since, oh, shoot, I think I got my first gig working in a school in the 1991-92 school year. So it's been a piece of who I am. And so I thought, well, let's add an education component to my story as well to give it more meaning, more meat, so to speak. And so the first half is what Eryk and I went through, my family went through as we went through the divorce process. But then the second half of the book focuses a lot on identifying what is parental alienation. What does it look like? What does it sound like? And what are some of the characteristics that come along with it? Then we brought in other people who were also in the field, people who had, like me, had gone through difficult situations, alienated from their parent or from their kids. People who worked in the field, professionals like Amy Eichler, who is down in Austin, Texas. And so, anyway, it worked out really well to combine a whole bunch of experts as well as other individuals besides myself to compile what is parental alienation. We threw in a bunch of research from Dr. Edward Kruk, from Dr. Douglas Darnell, and it really, I have been constantly impressed by the response I have gotten. So it has afforded me a lot of wonderful opportunities to meet fantastic people
Yeah.
and spread the idea that parental alienation, it happens. It happens a lot. And it is an absolute example of child abuse, because most of the time we can talk about child abuse as uh, well, physical child abuse. We see that. Sexual child abuse, there's plenty of examples of that as well. Both are extremely horrific, but what about emotional abuse? What about emotional neglect? When you're denying a child access to both parents. Look, if mom and dad want to get divorced, but the kids need to be allowed to love both parents equally. You know, that's just been a huge part of what I've been trying to speak and promote about for the last 8 years since we published For the Love of Eryk.
Yeah. I'm going to add that at the time that Eryk was killed, I lived in the same town as you in
Hmm.
Texas. I didn't know you at the time, but I heard about it. Obviously, it's just unimaginable for a mother to kill her own child in revenge for having basically your story is that she alienated you and did and accused you of things and was successful at using the courts to punish you for the things she made up. And then she just took it to the degree that the courts finally saw through it, which does not always happen. And
No,
when she lost custody, she went home and killed her son, your son, and herself. And of course, there's a lot that's in the story that's really important to see how all of this happened. But I was I was I was in the same community and I heard about it. So I don't know how many years it was from the time that happened until you and I got together to work on your book, but I just remember being in awe of being able to meet you and seeing where you were and the purpose that you were striving to make from such a tragedy. You had already written the first part, your story, and then you wanted to make it educational. And I don't know if you remember this, but you and I, at very sort of last minute in a way, decided to put together a seminar, parental
yes,
alienation seminar, thinking, well, let's just bring people in, we'll let them talk about it, we'll let people meet each other. And out of this seminar, we'll be able to collect more information. And do you remember how that went?
yes, that actually, we were hoping, we held it at a library on a
Yeah.
Saturday morning, and we were hoping, oh, if we get 25, 30 people, that would be amazing. And we had close to 100 people show up. We had folks come from all over the state. We had people come from outside the state of Texas.
Oh, yeah.
We even had the documentarian Ginger Gentile, who since the book was published, she actually has a fantastic video on parental alienation called Erasing Families. You can actually watch it now for free on YouTube.
Yeah.
Um, but we had, it was fantastic. And that actually spurred on another event that we had a few years later where we brought in nationally renowned speakers from across the country, and we had close to 300 participants at an event we held here in Dallas on parental alienation, and that has springboarded into other events across the country.
Yes.
We had people come from Europe to
Mhm.
participate in this, which has led me to participate with a wide variety of professionals across the field who has done
Mhm.
some amazing research to draw more attention to parental alienation, to challenge the judge that says, and those that are like him, that parental alienation doesn't exist. It's just a divorce dodge. It's one parent trying to get out of paying child support.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I can say that's not true. It's absolutely horrible. There was a study that came out here a couple years ago, and it identified in the neighborhood of just over 20 million kids are alienated from their parents. And alienation is not the same as estrangement. Alienation, I mean, estrangement is something that one parent does to, you know, make the kid not like them. Alienation is they went from a loving relationship with both parents to suddenly now one parent disparaging the other, going so far as to say, well, if you love me, then you can't love the other parent.
Yeah. And I would say I think it largely includes and almost requires the court's involvement. Since publishing your book, and I think that the reason why we had such a strong response to that little summit that we put together, I think we call it the
Hmm.
Parental Alienation Summit, and people literally flew in. I think we actually had almost as many people in attendance who came from outside of Texas and flew in to be there as
Yes,
people in Texas.
I was
And they had
I was floored.
maybe a month notice. It was just sort of a last minute. We were just trying to get some information for your book. And the reason why I think we had such participation is because it is such a huge and painful problem that wasn't really it's being I don't know if it's safe to say it's being more addressed, at least not by the courts system itself, but by people like you. I've since published many books on the topic to Marianne Petrie, especially, whom I believe she found me through you,
Yeah,
and
she did.
we've worked on a compilation of books where she's got different people telling their stories, and called "Raised by These Wolves," with, of course, the wolves referring to the court system and the court, actors. I just think it's so important what you're doing, and we're kind of jumping into what people take from it. Let me bring up that question now, and then I'm going to let you answer it. So, but what you hope people take from reading your book, and I just want to say it's so important. This you didn't necessarily start the movement, but you were among the first, I believe, to really begin raising more and more awareness through your activities and these events that you've talked about. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about what you hope people will take from reading the book itself?
Well, I can't. First of all, I can't take too much credit. The idea of parental alienation goes back a long time.
Mm,
There's even some court records going back to the 1930s where they identify. They don't use the term parental alienation, but they describe alienating behaviors.
mhm,
Dr. Richard Gardner in the mid 1980s coined the phrase parental alienation syndrome.
mm,
But my goal was to, yes, indeed, raise awareness, bring more people into what's going on. That what happened to me, as horrific as it was when Eryk's mother killed him, with me banging on the front door, no less, um,
mm.
was not as odd and unusual as one would like to hope and think.
Yeah,
It is when it comes to divorce, it's happening more and more. And one of the things in my research that I've learned is that there are three types. It happens to some people, it doesn't happen to others. Um, what made it unique with me was that Eric's mother was through our divorce, we had to do a psychological evaluation, and in there the psychologist that did the testing identified that she had basically borderline personality disorder. So one of the books that I've read that I thought was fantastic, that explains about alienation, but more specifically the kind of parents or spouse or ex-spouse, whatever, that would engage with it. But anyway, the book is titled Parents Acting Badly by Dr. Jennifer Harmon. And in there, she identifies three uh, personality disorders that if your ex has one of these, the chances of severe parental alienation taking place is likely to happen. And
Mm.
that is borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and antisocial or psychopathic disorder. She also says there's some histrionic personality disorder can also lead to that. But those first three are almost like a guarantee.
Mhm.
And one of the other books that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I wished I had found while I was going through it, because it's been published multiple times, multiple versions, but it is Dr. Richard Warshak's Divorce Poison. And he talks about
Mm.
parental alienation. He talks about the different levels. He says alienation is common in almost all divorces. But he said most of the time, and it's usually caused because both parents are angry with the other
Mm.
and they want the kids to side with them. But most parents going through a divorce quickly realize within a month or two, whoa, this is actually having a bad negative effect on the children, and they put an end to it.
Mhm.
But the severe parental alienation usually includes a personality disorder that I identified earlier. And Eric's mom had it in spades.
Yeah.
And looking back now, and I've done a lot of research into exploring personality disorders. In fact, I'm almost done. I should have my master's degree and be state certified to be a professional counselor here in the state of Texas. Um, Hopefully by Thanksgiving. And
Wow.
again, it's all
Congratulations.
stemmed from wanting to know more. There had to be a reason. There has to be an explanation for what happened to Eryk and I and our families.
Yeah. Well, if you don't mind, I'm gonna grab hold of your book real
Oh,
quick,
sure.
and I just wanna read a little bit from it. Okay. Just so that the viewers can get a little idea of some of the content and just let some of the teachings from your book be shared. So you have it here, your description about parental alienation. It says, the more I read and learn about this term, the more I realized just how many others are enduring the same kind of abuse Karen put both Eryk and me through. As I would meet people and hear or read their stories, it was incredulous to me how closely their challenges resemble what I faced. In some ways, their story was my story, only mine ended in the death of my son. While their children are still living, what they are suffering is not much different than the grief of death loss because of how totally and completely many of them have been alienated. What happened to you is almost sensational, the way that it ended. But the grief of death loss is, especially when we were at that summit, everyone was grieving because they were so cut off from their children that they're alive, but they may as well be dead. Some even said it'd be easier if they were dead than having them be alive and not able to access them at all. And my heart just goes out. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I don't know how it would be uh, to know that Eryk was still here
Mm.
and not be able to see him.
Yeah.
And walk in my work with families all over the country. It's it is hard. It is super super hard to try and give them hope. But at the end of the day, I have seen some success stories where there have been parents who have been able to work within the legal system to make it happen, to be able to get to see their kids. I worked with a gentleman that well when I went back to teaching, and he uh, he was able to get reunited with his children. They went through a reunification process,
Mhm.
and it worked amazing. And he was able to restore his relationship with his kids. And those are the kinds of stories that I like to tell, so that way, if you're going through it, it will help. A lot of times, kids if they're alienated, they will when they turn 18
Yeah.
and they get away from, the alienating parent, they go off to college or they
Mhm.
start living on their own. Many times they'll reach out to the alienated parent, and I've heard this enough times that I do believe that you can, that it sucks, you gotta wait till they're 18, and if
Yeah,
you're
and
only
that's hard to do, but there is hope. There's light, and I know that in the book we did include a lot of stories of people who had some happy endings like that, just to
Yeah,
towards the end of your book, just to give people hope. Um, I want to also read another little part here that talks. It's a subtitled or a subheading. The family law and mental health systems allow or support alienation. Parental alienation is serious and destructive, but it is amplified by the family law and mental health systems when they enable the alienator to be even more effective in cutting off the other parent. Without the facilitation of these systems, alienating parents wouldn't have the destructive and isolating power that they wield. The assistance given to alienating parents is often due to a gross lack of training of the professionals dealing with family issues and disputes. In many cases, they don't have the knowledge needed to even recognize what is happening.
that is sad but very true, and there has been a huge movement. One of the things that I would love to see all states do is when mom and dad get divorced, it's a 50-50 split.
Yeah.
And if it cannot be a 50-50 split, then you gotta prove why. Why
Yeah.
can't I mean, for example, if dad lives in one state and mom lives in another, then it is impossible for the kid to spend, 1 week with mom, 1 week with dad.
Yeah.
But in my case, we lived within 15 minutes of each other, and it should have been 1 week with mom, 1 week with dad, and, kid goes to school where he goes to school, and we make that happen. Be actively involved. But when the courts don't, they push the 64, you go from being a full-time parent to an every other weekend dad or every other weekend mom. That
Yeah.
that's brutal.
Well, and then
Um,
the alienator doesn't show up even
oh,
for the
yeah.
time you're scheduled, and then the courts don't enforce it, so they have essentially completely cut you off.
Yeah, they're
And that's
now
not something that they're addressing properly because it's happening, quite frequently,
and
and
that is where
mhm,
I am pleased to say the state of Texas made a change just recently.
mm,
And through the work of an activist by the name of Robert Garza.
mm,
And I met him this summer. Uh, he helped get passed through the state legislature and signed by the governor a law that will now punish a parent who interferes with or with visitation. I mean,
mhm,
it's been a felony in the state of Texas for a long time. It's in the penal code 25.03,
mm,
but it was never enforced. Well, now there is an enforcement component that will cost money to a parent if they interfere with the visitation. And
yeah,
if you not only that, if you interfere too much, well, then suddenly, boom, now visitation is taken from the alienating parent or the interfering parent and given to the parent that had lost or been denied visitation rights. And I'm going, wow,
yeah.
fantastic, way to go.
It shouldn't
Uh,
take a lot, it should just have been happening, but that is a huge step forward. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. A little more from your book, on that topic. It says, "One of the most important ways we can stop parental alienation is to change the way our society sees co-parenting and divorce. We need to shift what is currently socially acceptable, that one parent will have full custody with the other having no rights, to make it unacceptable for a parent to be completely cut off from their child or children, and for co-parenting to be the norm. Parental alienation is a vicious form of abuse, yet alienating parents are endorsed and supported by family, friends, and their community. This is not okay. We need to change society from accepting, supporting, and enabling child abuse in the form of parental alienation. This change can come about largely through awareness, as many people don't stop to realize how unfair it is to cut off a parent, or how one parent can paint a negative picture of the other parent that just isn't true. And I think that's so important because I know, as a publisher that's published many books on this topic and been involved, I see so often that people have just like, oh, I she got custody, he got custody, and the funny thing too is that sometimes the person gets custody and the other parent never gets to be with their kids, but they're paying child support, which is just sort of like, I mean, it's just heartbreaking what's happening. Um and that's why I just believe that your book and your efforts are so important, because it really is the norm in society. And I remember one thing, I don't remember who said it, but there was a speech that was given at that summit, that symposium that we put on. And it was someone talking about how we were at the restaurant afterwards. Everybody went
Oh,
to a
yes.
restaurant together. And someone stood and spoke about how that, 20, 30 years ago, people would be smoking throughout that restaurant and no one would think anything of it. And
Mhm.
today, that does not happen because we are finally aware of what even secondhand smoke can do to the health of others. And that person just encouraged the fact that we need to make the custody rights of both parents as normal as not smoking is now in our society. And I don't know, for how do you feel that was, gosh, how long has it been since we published your book?
8 years.
It's probably been 9 years since we had that gathering, is what kinda
Okay,
what I'm
that
getting at.
sounds about right.
So, I'm curious, based on the work that you've done since then, how do you feel we're doing progress-wise on that?
Nationally, I think we're making some progress. As more states are making 50-50 custody arrangements the standard or the norm, so that when mom and dad get, when you file for divorce, it's automatically 50-50. Texas, sadly, is not one of those states, but more and more states are headed that direction. I think that is a huge first step. Um, the idea that both parents need to be involved. There's an image out there that shows the kid in a soccer uniform, and you got mom and dad on either side, and then you got step parents on the other side, or bookending the mom and the dad, and it's all basically showing that co-parenting is the standard. Look, you brought this kid into the world. It's your responsibility to work together to raise them. And the kid is 50% mom and 50% dad. So when half of the parent is gone, the kid's asking the question, what's wrong with me? And when mom is bad mouthing dad, or dad is bad mouthing mom, the kid's going, well, I'm half dad, I'm half mom. Am I half bad too? And these are the wrong kinds of conversations that
Mhm.
children need to be having. They need to be laughing and joking and carrying on and living the life of a kid, not worried about, the issues of, am I bad?
Not becoming
And
the chess pieces in the parents' battle with each other. Now, I
absolutely.
think it is important to point out that there are those situations where you do have a narcissist or borderline personality, and those people are pretty next to impossible sometimes to work with. So there's
True.
definitely times when, but I do believe there needs to be the ability to actually identify who those people are, and not just call them that. A lot of what's interesting, a lot of times the parent being alienated is the one being pointed at as the alienator. It's sort of like a reverse weaponizing of the term. But really, hopefully, most cases, we've got healthy enough parents to be able to realize 50-50 custody should be the norm. And where it's taken away, there needs to be a lot of clinical psychological involvement to say, okay, indeed, this other parent is dangerous. And of course, in some cases, they've abused the children, and so, then it's obviously not a situation that they should
Yes.
have any access to them. But just too often, we're just seeing where it's just boop, boop, mom gets them, or whoever has the most money gets them. And yeah, so
And that's where, one of the things too is, The lawyers are more in so often. I won't say all because I've met a number that are straight shooting. But there
Yeah.
are a number of lawyers who are in it for the money, and as long as they can keep mom and dad fighting against each other, then they're pocketing all kinds of cash at
Oh,
four,
yeah.
five, $600 an hour.
Yeah.
Um, but a
It
lot of it
it
comes
really
down.
has become, I see the courts becoming more of an industry and a business than trying to get people in and out and fixing the problems.
Yeah,
I
and
think the
court
ones who
system.
aren't who are for that are the fewer. I hate to say it, but my experience and what I've observed is that it's just yeah, the more they fight, the more money they make.
Well,
So
and the court system is not designed for family law. And the only reason
no,
why we have to go to court is because when you get married, you're signing a financial
a contract.
agreement. It's like
Yeah.
you're creating a business and the children become assets, just like the house, just
Interesting.
like the
Oh,
car, just like the credit card bill. And when kids are treated as an asset rather than a living person, it lends itself to a combative nature. And when mom and dad are mad at each other, it's easy to put the kids in the middle. And when you've got a system that is a lot depends on the judge, a lot depends on the lawyer, a lot depends on the education of the mental health provider,
yeah,
and a lot of mental health providers are woefully undereducated about what parental alienation is, what it looks like, and how to deal with
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and this will open a whole conversation we could talk about for an hour, but I do just think we should point it out briefly. And because I have published and worked with other people who are dealing with that, the term parental alienation, since we published your book, has become a term that some say, oh, you shouldn't use that term in court. And if you use that term, you're immediately discounted. And where I have felt like it's actually the most accurate term you could use. But I feel like it's such an important term to educate that those who are on the other side of this want to sort of neuter it, if that makes sense. Have you come across that?
Oh, yes, there are a variety of deniers that are out there. I was at an event down in Austin this summer where we talked about that. There's a huge international event, I think, going on this, right now as we speak in Oslo, Norway, that is addressing the issue of parental alienation deniers. They put it out there that it's again, it's nothing, it's fake, it's junk science, and the answer to that is no, it's not junk science. The research that is being done is being published in tier one professional journals all over the country, and it's it is not junk science. It's a real event, and it is having catastrophic event. How about this? It's having catastrophic consequences on children at a time where they've got enough issues with social media, being addicted to their phones, that they need both parents and a healthy, loving
Mm,
relationship with both parents.
mm,
And when they're denied that, it has a it has a variety of issues that impact society beyond just the issue with the kid, because that kid's going to grow up and
right.
that kid's in school. Then that kid's going to go on to have a job. That kid's going to go on and get married, and they're going to have kids of their own, hopefully. And a lot of times we raise our kids the way we were raised, and it can self perpetuate. And if you
Yeah.
don't deal um, with issues when they're an issue small, they grow up to be an issue big.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been reading a variety of books on this that talk about the accumulative behavior of trauma that, when left untreated, can grow exponentially. It has a physical impact on us as well as a physiological
Yeah.
impact.
It can create the personality disorders that lead to the problem.
It could,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and like I said, we could probably talk for an hour on that, but just the
We could.
fact that the term itself has come under fire has really surprised me, and I kinda wanted to bring that up because, you may I hope we have people come on and comment from watching the show, if you have dealt with parental alienation in your life, please share with us. But I suspect you're going to have some people who are going to come and try to argue against it, because I see a lot of that. So I just wanted to be able to kind of address it here, and then let's see what people have to say about it. But I want to pivot over to the next question. And of course, this may be somewhat self explanatory, but I'd still like to bring up the title and the cover of your book and ask how you came up with those, and the significance of them.
Well, I can tell you the title came up very quick. I don't want to say it came to me in a dream, but I remember waking up one morning and I'm going, I know what I want the book to be titled. And For the Love of Eryk, Surviving Divorce, Parental Alienation, and Life After, it was boom, it was right there. Coming up with the picture was a little different. The story, the title was a reflection of the story that I wanted to tell. And I wanted to include the part life after to show that there is life after all of this. My life since Eryk passed away in October 21st, 2011, has changed dramatically. I am definitely not the same person I was on that fateful Friday morning. Um, the picture, that was a lot harder.
Yeah.
Um, we brainstormed, you and me, my wife Sherry and I, we were dancing around all kinds of stuff of what to do, what to do, what to do. And ultimately, we landed on the picture. That is the last picture I have of Eryk alive. That was
Wow.
taken his
Wow.
first day
Yeah.
of
Oh,
second grade. And so the picture is him standing outside of his elementary school. Now we blurred
wow.
out the elementary school, but that's him.
Yeah. Wow. That little detail really does make that cover significant. And then we used a font for the title that reflected childhood. More of a little
Yes.
scribble kind of script.
Yeah, that's
Um,
one of my favorite fonts.
yeah.
I think it's
And
Comic Sans.
it really pops against the blue and the little yellow shirt he was wearing. And yeah, wow. It's just.
Well, and I think we went with the orange because orange was
Mhm.
his favorite color.
Oh, yeah. Well, one more question for you
Oh,
before we
sure,
wrap it up.
absolutely.
And there may be people watching this who are wanting to tell their story, because it, as you mentioned, it's very healing to write it, and it brings purpose to share stories like this with others, and make a difference in the world with what we've been through. So, my last question for you is, what advice you have for aspiring authors?
Uh, I would say be authentic, be true, be honest. Um, you're right, Melanie. Telling the story was exceptionally therapeutic for me. It helped me process the tragedy, work through the trauma. I mean, nothing like standing just feet away from your son when he's murdered by his mother. I mean, I'm banging on the front door. That was a traumatic event for me, but it didn't define me. And so being able to tell a story, being able to tell what you're going through, helps explain, because there's so many sides to a story, and being able to share it, I think helped me immensely. So um, I would say to any aspiring author, be honest in what you want to share, be truthful in what you share. And it, sometimes it exposes, I mean, it exposed I had to look deep inside myself to look at the harsh truths. That, in my case, I was talking about, it wasn't all her. I mean, I played a part in the divorce, in our failed marriage. I had to take ownership of that, and we talk about that in the book. That, some of the things. So it's, be transparent.
That's great advice. Yeah, I think sometimes, especially when a story is so hard to write, um, you may want to not make it so public. And I really commend you for the bravery and courage it took to really share your experience and all the darkness, because there's a lot in your story. And
There
the,
is.
the light that comes out of it is the second half of the book. Really, the first half is tragic, but it's important. In the second half, you really do bring so much light to the issue. You gave voice to so many people. In the book, there's just what we ended up doing is creating little shaded sections, and there's just shaded sections throughout, where you let people speak first person. This, I don't know how this is showing up, but yeah, you give voice to people in your book, and you've made a difference in the world. And I think it's fair to say that Eric's life has made a huge difference in the world because of what you've done with it, because of writing this book. So
And that
thank
was the
you.
point.
Yeah.
Not just to share my story, but to make meaning out of what happened. And I'm happy to say that Eric's story that you helped me share was part of a research paper that was published almost a year ago, where they
Oh,
did a deep
wow.
dive into 4 different examples of alienation. But there are
Wow.
tons of
Hmm.
research journal or research articles out there, a fantastic wealth of information on the internet. There's
Right.
a program or a group called the Anti-Alienation Project, uh, sponsored by a lady out of Utah who was an alienated parent or alienated child, and so now she works
Mm.
with college kids to help them reconnect with their alienated parents. So there's
Wow.
a lot of stuff out there
Yeah.
if you just go look.
Well, thank you for bringing all of that to this show, and
Thanks for
I'll be
having me.
watching you continue to make a difference, I am sure.
I appreciate it, and I will give you full credit. I wouldn't be here without your help and assistance. So, thank you
Well,
to you and to Triumph Press for helping tell Eric's story in a way I would have never thought possible.
I'm grateful to have been able to play a part.